Hello and welcome to the third day of the NWR Virtual Investor Conference. I'm Andrew Gagan. Great to have your company. The first company we're going to hear from today is Calyx. It is a multi-award-winning Australian technology company focused on environmentally friendly solutions for advanced batteries, crop protection, aquaculture, wastewater, I should say, and carbon reduction. New materials produced by Calyx have demonstrated similar properties to highly active nanomaterials without the safety concerns and high cost, but with many benefits. Calyx has developed technology for CO2 mitigation in the production of cement, which is currently part of a demonstration project in Europe, and Swedish company Saltex recently announced it will integrate Calyx's electric-powered kiln technology in a pilot project to develop a 200 kilowatt energy storage system. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask any questions after the presentation, do so by using the Q&A panel on your screen. Let's now hear from Managing Director and Chief Executive of Calyx, Phil Hodgson. Phil.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and welcome everyone this morning to our presentation. Hopefully you can see it up there on your screens. Just running through, first of all, our little tagline, Mars is for quitters. As Andrew said, we've got a technology that touches quite a few sort of thematics around ESG, environment, social and governance type investing. And so a little tagline there's a bit of Aussie humour, but contains a serious message as well with respect to what it is that we're trying to achieve with our core technology. Just in terms of these sort of investment thematics around environment, social and governance investing, obviously a couple of fairly influential people here in Australia are seeing this as quite a strong investment theme, and certainly investment theme that's going to be strengthening and lasting for some time. And then just recently, these tailwinds in terms of investment themes around ESG investing are only increasing. Here, for example, you see a couple of funds that are starting to amass pretty big war chests for investment in technologies that are going to enable the world to move to lower emissions technologies over the course of the next decade. And it's not just investment funds, for example. Global economies, 50% of the global GDP represented by the economies around the world are committing to net zero CO2 by 2050. Top companies are also now putting out their commitments to net zero by 2050. I've talked about the investment that's required, and the Energy Institute estimates that there's probably about 3 trillion per year required in investment to enable net zero CO2 by 2050 as well. So quite a big thematic coming through. Just what is our core technology, though? Why is it that our core technology seems to sit really nicely behind all of these investment themes that are coming through? Believe it or not, it's just a reinvention of the 5,000-year-old kiln. It's just a new way to heat stuff up, but it's quite conceptually simple, but fundamentally different in its approach to current technologies. In a traditional kiln, you throw what it is you want to heat up with the fuel and you light a match. And it's been done much the same way for 5,000 years. Sure, there's been a few process improvements since then, but that's the basic principle. What we do is a little different. We have a central reactor tube, and I've got a nice little toilet roll here to sort of demonstrate that. This picture on the right-hand side of your screen is our plant at Bacchus Marsh in Victoria. That was our first commercial scale demonstration facility. And this tube that's inside that little furnace there is about 22 meters high and about 1.8 meters in diameter. So it's fairly large, much bigger than this. But essentially we just heat a tube from the outside. We heat up to about 1,000 degrees centigrade. And whatever it is we're trying to heat up, we grind to quite a small particle size. Imagine holding a lump of flour in your hand, that sort of particle size. And imagine just dropping that flour to the floor and watching it sort of float down. Well, that's all that happens inside our tube. We just drop whatever it is we're trying to heat up in a powder form, and it just floats down through the tube. We heat the tube to 1,000 degrees centigrade, and the radiative heat from the red hot walls of that tube radiate into the powder, and that's how we heat it up. So we keep the furnace gases or whatever it is we're trying to heat completely separate from what it is we're trying to heat up. And that actually has some fundamental advantages over the way it's done currently. The first key advantage is compared to, say, the cement and lime industries that use conventional kilns, where the furnace gases are coming in contact with the particles to heat them up. We keep it completely separate. But the cement and lime industries, their main input is limestone, and limestone by weight is nearly half CO2 trapped in the rock. And when the cement and lime industries heat that up, that CO2 comes out of the rock and basically just goes up their stack. And that CO2 is 2/3 of the cement and lime industry's emissions. So it's much more than just the heat that they're using, the combustion fuels, etc. 2/3 of their emissions comes from the rock. And that's important for them because they're responsible for about 8% of global CO2 emissions. And so you can imagine with our technology, the heat's on the outside, the heat medium, the particles are flowing down on the inside, the ground limestone or raw cement meal, and the CO2 that's coming out, that basically makes its way back up to the top of the tube and comes out the top as a pure stream. So it directly separates, if you like, the CO2 already for these industries. And so that's the first advantage of heating it our way versus heating it in a standard conventional kiln, because the CO2, as I said, just goes up the stack gas and it's very difficult to separate at that point, whereas we just separate it because we heat it differently. The second advantage of our technology is we're not contacting any furnace gases with the particles so they can stay nice and pure. We can actually maximize what's called the surface area or porosity of these particles. So as any trapped gases in those tiny particles comes out of those particles, it creates a tiny pore or channel. And because we're only heating ours for a very short period of time, we're just in the kiln for like 10 or 20 seconds, those trapped gases can come out of the particles, create a very highly porous structure, not contaminated with furnace gases. And so we can make high surface area, quite pure materials. And we're developing that aspect of the technology into business streams in wastewater treatment, in advanced batteries, in biotech applications as well. The third benefit of the technology is we don't care how we heat the stuff up. So the heat comes in, we're heating a tube externally, we can heat it with natural gas, or we can heat it with biomass, or we can heat it with waste fuel, or we can heat it with renewable electricity. We don't care. We're energy agnostic. And that's interesting because as the industry looks to decarbonize, any industry with a heat process involved, which is quite a few chemical and mineral processing industries, we have a renewable energy ready kiln. In fact, a kiln that can switch between fossil fuels and electricity. So as the grid decarbonizes, you can take advantage of peak loads in electricity production in the middle of the day and switch back to fossil fuels at night. So it's a very flexible and pathway, if you like, to the decarbonisation of industry. So quite a neat, simple sort of core concept, protected with patents, obviously, an Australian-grown technology, with many patent families covering the core technology and each application as we develop each application. Just moving on, those sort of 5 industries that I talked about before, which was sort of water treatment, CO2 mitigation, we have biotech, advanced batteries and sustainable processing. All of them fit quite neatly in the sort of ESG tailwind space. So in the water treatment business, for example, we've made a very high surface area active magnesium-based product, which is very safe and environmentally friendly, but very effective in biotreatment systems at helping reducing phosphates and nitrates. And so that particular product is playing into a nice thematic with respect to wastewater treatment. The CO2 mitigation, I'm going to go into a little more detail in the next few slides, but obviously the tailwinds there are quite obvious. The price of emitting a ton of CO2 is just going up. And in Europe, for example, it's gone up tenfold in the last 4 years, hitting recently over €55 per tonne of CO2 emitted. In the biotech space, again, it's a very high surface area magnesium, safe material that we're making. And that's going into some quite interesting applications in crop protection. Recently, we're developing a marine coatings application, and we're looking at other potential applications as well in that space. So biotech is really quite an interesting and specialised space for highly active materials. Advanced batteries, similar. A different mineral that we're using here based upon manganese, the main mineral. Or the main sort of element, if you like, in lithium-ion battery cathodes. And if you can imagine those tiny particles with quite high porosity and quite strong and flexible. So when we make them quite porous in our reactor, they can bend a little bit. And so as lithium ions move in and out, the degradation typically associated with crystal cracking and decline, we're looking to bypass that with a very simple process that makes a highly active material that it will make a better battery and hopefully a cheaper and more easily recyclable battery, because we want to eliminate some of the more exotic and expensive compounds from that material, such as cobalt and nickel, which is very commonly used in advanced battery applications. And the last area that we're looking at, that I'll also talk a bit more about in this presentation today, is sustainable processing. This is probably the latest and newest sort of addition business line to Calyx. And that's really around this whole electrification of industry. And so there's quite a few interesting companies and applications that have started to appear and approach us, because we have a kiln already electrifiable. We've already built one at Bacchus Marsh as well. And so we've been using that to test all sorts of different materials. As Andrew mentioned at the top, Soltex is one, which is a sort of a thermochemical energy storage system. I won't go into too much detail today on that one. And the other one that we announced recently was a tie-up with Pilbara Minerals to help with the processing of spodumene ores, which is the core material used in producing lithium, again, for the lithium-ion battery industry. And so the ability to electrify the process of heating up something, of calcining something, as it's called in the industry, is really important for decarbonisation of industry. So CO2 mitigation and sustainable processing are the two key pieces that I'll go into a little more detail on in this presentation. So one of the first, we raised some capital in March 2021. These ESG or investment tailwinds were really starting to strengthen. And we thought, look, we'll put the accelerator down. We'll spend quite a bit of money on lawyers and these sorts of things to help as we develop our commercial agreements to help protect our IP and maximise obviously the value in our negotiations as we start to deploy the technology in various industries. And so that March capital raise, we talked about a few things that we'd be doing, and there's been quite some substantial progress since that March capital raise along several business fronts. In sustainable processing, we announced in July 2021, a tie-up with RHI Magnesita. RHI Magnesita is one of the largest, in fact, the largest refractory company in the world. Now, what is refractory? It's those little bricks that sort of sit inside steel kilns, cement kilns, and those bricks actually protect and hold the heat in the process and protect the steel vessels. Now that refractory is made out of what's called magnesia, magnesium oxide, and that's made in much the same way as lime is made, which is calcium oxide. You take a raw ore, in this case for the refractory industry, it's called magnesite. And again, about half the weight of magnesite is CO2 that's trapped in that rock in the form of what's called a carbonate. And when they heat that up, in this case, it's about 760 degrees they've got to heat it to. They get their magnesia, roughly half the ton, but the other half the ton is CO2. So the refractory industry is under incredible pressure as these CO2 penalties start to come in around the globe. Under incredible pressure to try and decarbonise. And we've been working with RHI Magnesita for nearly 2 years now. And as I say, in July 21, we announced an MOU with RHI Magnesita to develop the first kiln into the refractory industry to capture that CO2 for them. And also, we're going to be looking at electrification of that facility, again, to take advantage of the fact that electrification of industry, the ability to use electrons, renewably generated electrons especially, in this process is of importance. This particular project looks at the initial stage, which we're in now, is the front-end engineering design, what's called the pre-front-end engineering design or pre-feed. and it's for a commercial scale facility. Our facility at Bacchus Marsh is already at this scale, so there's no scale-up risk required with respect to this particular project. The key thing that we're doing is testing to make sure that the magnesia that we produce out of our kiln is suitable for then on manufacturing into the refractory bricks that companies like RHI Magnesita make. And so that testing's been going on for quite some time, and phase 1 has passed and was very successful. That took about a year, and phase 2 testing is underway. This is getting increasingly significant in terms of the tonnages we're processing, and obviously those tonnages are then shipped back to RHI Magnesita, and they're looking to make refractory bricks out of it. And so this particular development is not really a scale-up risk at all. It's more about making sure that the product quality that we make is going to be of sufficient level that RHI Magnesita can make their refractory bricks. As I say, phase 1 testing was very successful, hence the move to an MOU with RHI Magnesita, and phase 2 testing is underway right now. That'll probably take us through to about the end of the year, and that's pretty much in alignment with where this what's called pre-feed stage will get us. RHI Magnesita is, if you haven't heard of them, as I say, they're one of the largest refractory companies in the world. They've got numerous facilities around the world, several production facilities and several raw ore mines as well, raw ore magnesite mines. And for those who are familiar with us, we are also interested in magnesite. We have our own little mine in South Australia. But the ability to perhaps do a strategic tie-up with RHI Magnesita is also being explored here for access to raw ores around the world that we can then use in our caustic calcine, or the business that we're using for wastewater treatment. And there's a little quote from Louis Bittencourt, who's the Chief Technology Officer at RHI Magnesita, at the bottom right there. And RHI Magnesita have committed $50 million US dollars in their decarbonisation efforts. And obviously, Calyx is well positioned to benefit from that type of investment. So that's one of the ones that we announced since our March capital raise. Another one that we announced was what we're calling the Pilbara Minerals opportunity. This particular one, again, was following several significant testing runs on what's called spodumene. Spodumene is one of the main sources of lithium. It's a hard rock mine here in Australia. It has high lithium content, up to about 5 or 6%. But that spodumene at the moment is dug out of the ground and shipped off to China. And the Chinese then process that into a lithium salt, if you like, that's then used in lithium-ion batteries. And so at the moment, we're digging it up and sending it offshore. But the interesting thing that we've done with Pilbara is have a look at our technology to take that spodumene, and especially what's called the spodumene fines. And so when Pilbara Minerals dig up a lump of spodumene, they have to ship it, they grind it down, and what's called try and beneficiate it. So try and concentrate up the better parts of the ore. And one of the processes in there is a flotation cell, where they float fines from the mine, all the very small powdery stuff. And those fines aren't as high in terms of the grade of spodumene, but at the moment they're pretty much waste. And so if you recall, our technology can process fines. In fact, that's what it does. That's what we prefer. So if you can take those fines, which are currently waste, and process them in our technology, what you're doing is heating the spodumene up. You're getting this conversion, which takes what's called alpha spodumene to beta spodumene. Effectively, it's like a bit of popcorn. It sort of blows up in sort of size, and that allows then the lithium to be extracted much more easily. So if you can do that with our kiln, which can process fines, can use electrons, and so Pilbara have already started down a pathway of starting to solar power a lot of their facilities in the Pilbara. And so our technology's already ready to be solar powered as well. And then you can imagine a process onshore where we've taken the fines, processed it in our technology, converted it to that extractable stage, and then produce, we're looking at a lithium salt onshore here in Australia. And so suddenly you're not shipping sort of 5 or 6% lithium concentrate offshore, you're shipping 35% plus. And so there's an enormous saving in terms of shipping what's effectively waste overseas. And of course, again, because of that renewable power, you're able to lower the carbon footprint of the material you're producing. And in the battery supply chain, and indeed across many of our export industries, the carbon footprint is going to become increasingly important. I'll talk about that shortly. So this is a very exciting development here. We're in phase 1 in the scoping study. If we're successful, we'll look at forming a joint venture with Pilbara Minerals to develop the technology into a demonstration. And now that demonstration will still be small commercial scale. So a couple of thousand tons at least of this product looking to be produced out of a demonstration facility. And then forming a joint venture to commercialize that to the whole industry. So it's not just a tie-up with Pilbara, it's looking at joining with Pilbara to then commercialize the technology across the spodumene industry. And that's a significant opportunity for us. So quite exciting, that particular development with Pilbara Minerals, again, only just announced in May. In terms of the CO2 mitigation part of our business, lots happening on this front since our March capital raise as well. Key is we're doing something here in Australia at last. In June 21, we were announced as what's called the HILT CRC, the Heavy Industry Low Emissions Cooperative Research Centre, which is 39 million in federal funding. We're a key technology partner in that cooperative research centre. And other partners there include ADBRI, Alcoa, Boral, Fortescue, South32, names obviously familiar to most of you, and they're very interested in looking at decarbonising their industries as well. And you may not be aware but lime is used in many production processes such as steel and aluminium. And decarbonising lime is going to be really important, again, to reduce the carbon footprint of these industries. Europe has already announced carbon tariffs on imported goods from 2023. The States is likely to follow, as is China. So Australian industry, even though there's no carbon tax here, by default, we now will have one, and we've got to do something about it quickly. So any way that these industries can look to decarbonise, such as their key input ingredients, such as lime, they've got to try and start to do now. Otherwise, it's going to start impacting our export industries. So really exciting announcement in June for that particular development program. So just in terms of the development of our technology, we're calling our cement and lime technology LILAC, Low Emissions Intensity Lime and Cement. So July 21, we finalised the runs of what we call our LILAC 1 plant, and that plant has proven highly successful. March, we passed our LILAC 2 front-end engineering design key milestone, and so we're on track to look at our final investment decision on that scaled-up version of the plant in 2022. Again, in March, we announced a tie-up with ADBRI to look at a low emissions lime project here in Australia. And in July, we announced a tie-up with Tarmac, which is a subsidiary of CRH, one of the largest cement and lime companies in the world, to look at a similar project in the UK. All of these projects are critical for these particular industries, and all of them are starting to move in terms of early phase 1 work on front-end engineering design with these companies. Just in terms of the tailwinds that I mentioned before, I'll pick the EU and the US as key sort of tailwind areas that we're looking at here. You can see here the progression from 2018 to 2021, just increasing the pressure, if you like, on industries to decarbonise, both with carrots and sticks, if you like. The carrots being incentive programs such as the Innovation Fund here in the EU, which is giving plenty of money, and the stick, which is the emissions trading scheme. As they emit these tons of CO2, they've got to go on market and buy any extra over and above a cap. And that cap continues to reduce year on year. And the EU recently announced even more stringent measures, 55% reduction in CO2 by 2030, and they're going to include maritime shipping for the first time as well in their CO2 caps. In the US, what's really interesting there is a tax credit system that, again, has just been increasing in its, let's say, generosity in terms of CO2 mitigation projects. And with the Biden administration, there's several bills being introduced into legislation for debate there, looking at raising what's called this tax credit system for enhanced oil recovery CO2, for geosequestration of CO2. And so these potential projects in both the EU and US with these incentives could be quite positive NPV projects. And we're working with numerous cement and lime companies, some of which are based in and have facilities in the US and the EU to try and take advantage of the current conditions in terms of these particular incentives. So just in terms of coming up next, we've obviously got our full year financials. I haven't talked too much about our financials. We're obviously a bit of a blackout there, but we'll be releasing those financials to the market on August 24. And then we're going to have a full investor webinar Thursday, September 2nd. We'll get those details out shortly, where I'll cover off, obviously, the performance. I'll cover off those other lines of business that I just mentioned briefly today in much more detail. And also look forward in terms of the key milestones for this calendar year this financial year, and looking ahead a bit longer term as well. So again, thank you all for your time this morning. I guess we can take a few questions, Andrew, hopefully.
Phil, thanks very much for the presentation. Let's get to a couple of questions. The first one being, just as far as that CO2 mitigation is concerned, question as to how you actually capture that, and then what happens to the CO2 once you've done that.
Yeah, so if you recall our little kiln, our tall oil here, so that as we process the cement and lime, the material just floats down towards the bottom. The CO2 that comes out basically comes out the top as a pure stream. So it's basically captured as a result of coming out as a pure stream. It's 95% plus CO2. What do you do with it is a very good question. So the CO2 market, the industrial gas market is there. You can use that in the industrial gas market, but ultimately there's too much going to be produced by these industries, and you're going to have to look at other usages, such as what's called mineral carbonation or sequestration in recycled concrete fines and these sorts of things. And these sort of technologies that are being developed by the Heidelberg Cements of the world. But ultimately, you're going to have to sequester it. You're going to have to re-inject it back underground again, because just too much is being produced currently by the cement and lime industries. And so those sorts of projects are being developed in Europe and the US as well.
Okay. And Phil, what do you see as the most valuable applications or verticals for the business?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think suffice to say that the movement on CO2 in the cement and lime is probably a key focus of the company right now, given the pace and the opportunity. If we had to build a 1 million ton CO2 facility every 3 to 4 days for the next 25 years, we would still not decarbonise the cement and lime industries. That's the scale of the problem they face and the scale of the opportunity for us.
And you spoke of the lilac solution that you've developed. How advanced or competitive is that solution compared with other potential solutions from other companies?
Yeah, good question. So our lilac plant, what's called tech readiness level. So NASA has what's called a tech readiness scale from 1 to 9. 1 is an idea in someone's head, 9 is fully commercialized. We're now at TRL 6 with the completion of the Lilac 1 project. The Lilac 2 project, which is scheduled basically sort of late 23, early 24 for commissioning, that will take our tech readiness level to 8. So we're getting very close to commercialization. In terms of competitive, there's one other main technology that we're competing against, which is called amines. Amines is a chemical capture system that is basically a chemical plant that you've got to build on the end of your cement plant. And so that particular system there is probably more advanced technically. It's been used for 20 years in the power industry. But the reason it's not widely used in cement is it's very expensive. It adds about 40% to the power bill of a power plant. And it's going to be similar for a cement plant. And so our technology compared to amine is just a different way to heat. It's not a new process per se. So our advantage, should we prove our technology at scale, is to be far more cost competitive than amine.
And Phil, you've spoken of that memorandum of understanding with RHI Magnesita. plus the potential for a joint venture with Pilbara Minerals. Any other potential partnerships on the horizon that you could speak to?
Yeah, in the public domain, we've disclosed there's just in the sustainable processing part of our business, there's probably 4 other opportunities we're looking at right now. And not all in the same space. They're all in different industries, but all looking to electrify and decarbonise their industries. So, and then in the CO2 space, there are 6 cement companies, again, we've publicly disclosed that we're developing up projects for that we haven't been able to announce yet, and 2 other additional lime companies. So plenty on the horizon.
Phil, thanks very much for the presentation, and thanks for joining us from Calyx.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks all for your time.